Welcome to Electric Perspectives, a podcast that explores how America's electric companies are working to deliver the reliable, affordable, secure, and clean energy that powers our economy and our everyday lives. This show is brought to you by EEI, the Edison Electric Institute, which represents all U.S. investor-owned electric companies. I'm your host, Brian Reel.
Today, we're discussing how electric companies are adapting to rising electricity demand, extreme weather, and evolving customer expectations, all while building a smarter, more resilient energy grid. Technology and AI are playing a bigger role than ever in modern grid planning, helping companies improve reliability, efficiency, and customer experience. Joining us for this episode are Ameren Illinois Chairman and President Letty Singh and Bijlee co-founder and CEO Abhay Gupta, who will discuss the value of grid investments, how using AI-powered technology helps electric companies optimize grid management, and more. Lenny and Abhay, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. Really good to be here and really appreciate the opportunity from EEI to be part of this effort today.
Thank you, Brian. Glad to be here and looking forward to the chat.
And Lenny, before we dive in, can you tell our listeners a little bit more about Ameren Illinois? And you're also part of a bigger Ameren Corporation, right?
Yeah, so let me start with the Ameren Corporation. So Ameren Corporation operates electric and gas companies both in Illinois and Missouri. Ameren Illinois is a distributional electric and a gas company that serves about 1.2 million electric customers, 812 natural gas customers throughout 44,000 square miles of Illinois in central and southern Illinois. That's roughly 1,200 communities across 75% of the state of Illinois. Our Missouri company is a little bit different. It's a fully vertically integrated utility that serves 1.2 million electric customers and about 150,000 in natural gas customers across 24,000 square miles in Missouri. Then we have another entity called Ameren Transmission that develops transmission infrastructure investment throughout the country. And we've had a strong track record of constructing and safely operating over 8,000 miles of transmission energy systems across the country and looking at opportunities also in Canada.
So the energy landscape really is changing dramatically. Demand is growing at a pace we haven't seen in decades. Customer expectations are changing. And of course, there's a huge interest in increasing grid resilience, given all the extreme weather that we're seeing. Given all these factors, how has energy grid planning changed in recent years? And are there technologies and tools that are being utilized today in the planning process that are newer that you weren't able to utilize in recent years?
Yeah, so Brian, let me first start with emphasizing what is I call the foundation to the changing energy landscape, right? It's really our obligation to deliver safe, reliable, and resilient electric and natural gas to our customers in a way that is equitable and cost effective, right? Because we have millions of households who rely on us each and every day. But in terms of dynamics, in terms of how we plan, there are a number of factors influencing how we think about today. One is there's changing state and federal policies. There's evolving technologies like renewables around solar, wind. There's storage technology. We see things like small modular nuclear, cold climate heat pumps, the growing number of available EVs on the system, geothermal, things like clean molecules like hydrogen and renewable natural gas. You also mentioned more frequent and more severe weather throughout the years. That also impacts how we think about how we plan the system. And probably the last piece of what's influencing how we think about the system is changing expectations of our customers, right? And each of these factors present new and challenging ways in which we think about how we prioritize and execute on infrastructure of the systems we are custodians of.
And maybe we'll start with you, Abhay, but definitely want your perspective as well, Lenny, of how technology and AI is helping planners today. And clearly there are new tools that are coming online, and it just seems like there's a lot of innovation that's going on there.
Yes, absolutely, Brian. So Bijlee has been about 12 to 13 years working with utilities. We are now working with about 40 utilities, almost 40 million homes. And one of the things is the use of technology. And the latest technology obviously is AI, even generative AI, very exciting. The use of technology, I think, has become a lot more important and almost mandatory in handling the challenges we are facing. For example, what has changed from past is the biggest change on the grid load in past was weather-based change in terms of the HVAC load or migrations. But with the change in the whole renewables and the electric vehicles and the data centers, the next 10 years are not going to come from the forecasting of the last 10 years. So if there's a drastic change on the grid, the ability for grid planners and all the distribution asset managers to figure out where and how should I plan my grid upgrades. And remember, these changes are not happening uniformly. They're happening in pockets at different times in different denominations. Like people buy electric vehicles in bunch, like this affluent neighborhood will buy electric vehicles all of a sudden very fast. And those assets will be under the capacity constraints way faster than maybe something else. So this non-uniformity in a completely new type of load growth, including the data centers, is going to challenge design and planning and execution of the grid over the next 10 years, and it's going to be totally different from the last 10 years. So the technology comes to help here. The ability for technology companies like ourselves that bring AI forecasting, specifically knowing where your load growths are, who has electric vehicle, etc., will help planners to identify the problem areas ahead of time and continue, like Lenny said, a reliable source of power that lives through this changing times with flying colors and come out winner on the other side with the right investments made in time at the right places.
And Lenny, have you seen your organization, others in the industry, adopting and really putting these sort of new technologies to work as you're going through the planning process?
Brian, as I mentioned earlier, changing technology is also a driver, right? And I also mentioned changing customer expectations. So let me give a couple of examples, specifically around the customers. Customers want today more insights and more control of their energy use. And that means real-time or near real-time communication on outages, energy consumption, and cost, right? So this translates to things like smart thermostats, smart meters that gather data. And we then have to synthesize that data and then display that data or present that data to customers in their preferred channel of communication. That's things like using our app that they can have on their smartphone, text messaging, email, and chatbots, just to name a few. So all of those technologies at the end of the day play into how customers interact with us and is changing. But the other part of that is to process that massive amount of data. It requires systems and analytic technologies like AI and machine learning capabilities in our systems, in our portfolio of products, to be able to synthesize that data and present that information to customers, right? As we continue to modernize the grid and prepare the grid for two-way power flow, as we think about electrifying buildings and transportation, AI is likely a tool that allows us to think about how we plan and manage the grid in several areas, right? Things like dynamic pricing allows customers to understand what power costs when, how they're using it, and can they shift their behaviors to the off-hour or non-peak time to reduce the bills and manage their consumption. Another way we think about it, I mentioned chatbots, engaging with customers through chatbots, how to help them answer questions quickly without having to pick up a phone and call and talk to someone, really personalizing how they use energy and customizing solutions to meet their individual energy needs.
And Ameren has made significant investments into the grid to really make it smarter, which sometimes means leveraging technology that helps to improve reliability, efficiency, track energy usage. Now with people self-generating, otherwise you have a two-way flow of energy, but that also has that two-way flow of data that you were just talking about, and all the new methods of communication between electric companies and their customers. How do you step back and think about how these things benefit customers? And is there a way in which you try to quantify that as you think about proposing these sort of investments to commissioners, knowing that there's a lot of folks that have to greenlight these sort of investments, and you really often do need to make the case that there's a clear benefit to customers?
Yeah, and I'll go back to what I mentioned before, right? Customer expectations, their adoption of new technologies, their increasing demand for safe and reliable energy, more severe, more frequent storm, are factors really driving the need for investments on both our electric and our natural gas system. And I'll highlight a few investments. Ameren Illinois has invested roughly $700 million over the last decade to strengthen the safety, reliability, and resiliency of our grid through our modernization plans that really involves new technology that makes the grid more resilient, more safe, but also making the grid prepare itself to be able to adapt to renewable technologies, new energy sources, and that two-way power flow I mentioned earlier. On the smart grid investment side, with things such as distribution automation, we have avoided over 6.5 million outages, saving customers over $2 billion in the last decade, right? Customer reliability has increased by 23% in that time frame. Building the grid for two-way power flow as more renewables come online the grid must be configured to allow us to manage the intermittency of these sources, right? We can't really afford to miss an opportunity to integrate new, cleaner energy, new technologies, which could eventually allow customers to benefit by lower cost in the long run. So those are some of the ways that we try to demonstrate to regulators and customers that the investments are paying dividends for them.
And Abe, how can Bidgely's AI platforms support electric companies as they work to optimize the grid and the service to customers? Some of the stuff that Lenny was just talking about.
I think the best way to describe this is by taking a few examples. And I'll start with the core technology. One of the core technologies that we invented was load disaggregation. And what it does is looking at the load patterns from the smart meter data and also on the grid, we identify what's happening behind the meter. Now, what you cannot understand and measure, you cannot improve. So this goes here only when you're able to measure, let's say, which home bought an EV, where is the load growth going, which home has air conditioning which is degrading, and what is the load profile for each home. So it has double side benefits. And this is where I get into the examples. Let's say we start with consumers. Lenny just mentioned dynamic pricing, right? Life is getting more complex as time passes by. When I buy solar, all of a sudden we have gotten into more complex rate plan, because when am I shipping energy back into the grid versus when am I taking energy from the grid, it's not that easy for me to calculate my bill and the forecast. When I get hit with dynamic rates, like time of use rates, some acute scenarios also have demand rates in residential, but time of use rates is very, very popular, especially when people buy EV, there's an introduction of EV time of use. Now, people have to remember, hey, energy is more expensive between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. And so forth, sometimes in morning. And it becomes harder for people to manage their own energy bills. With batteries, there's another layer of complexity, right? When am I charging the battery? Which is also true, what Lenny mentioned, two-way flow of the energy into the grid. So batteries and also in future vehicle to grid will create two-way flow of energy. So this makes it pretty complex for an average consumer to figure out, hey, how do I optimize my bill? And for some people, how do I optimize my carbon output? So this is the first part where technology comes as a solution, knowing automatically what's happening in the house, what are the rate plans, and what are the optimization possibilities, minimizing the bill for a consumer while at the same time minimizing their load profile on the grid at the peak hours is a win-win for consumer to manage their bill, reduce their bill, make the right investments, and then coming to the grid, right? So that's an example of consumer being helped with the technology.
Yeah, really understanding how and when customers use energy it's really an important part of helping us implement different types of rates for customers, including time of use rates, off-peak, non-peak. It really helps us to get customers to manage their behavior, change their behavior, and shift their energy patterns over time to non-peak use, etc. This does two things. One, it allows customers to save on their energy bills and really lessen demand on the grid. The second piece of that less demand on the grid at those periods of time allows us how to optimize how we invest in the grid in a cost-effective way, really reducing the investment needed if we can shift usage to those times where there is available capacity on the grid, and ultimately customers benefits from that.
Absolutely. So another example that comes to mind within that same theme is knowing there are discretionary loads and non-discretionary loads. When you are heating your house, you really can't stop heating your house. You need to do that. Maybe you can change your set point by a few degrees. So that's not as discretionary. But if you're running your pool pump or you are running your dishwasher or those kind of things, they are easily shiftable, or even charging your car. So knowing the profile of each home and helping them understand and what is shiftable, what is not, is a win-win. Just going into the second layer of detail. We can now focus on the grid side. Now, how do we help this on the grid? So same technology coming to the rescue on the grid side, or at least helping the efficient investment into the grid is, for example, if 10 homes or 20 homes are fed through a transformer, knowing what is the rate of EV adoption, when people are charging and when are they concurrently charging, will help a grid planner to say, hey, I don't want to unnecessarily go and upgrade this transformer right now. But if you see the growth of that charging trend to be at a point where in the next 12 months you're going to hit the capacity, you want to proactively plan for that. Now, there's a second layer of efficiency. Do we upgrade that transformer, or do we figure out, can we shift the load? To shift the exact load, knowing exactly which homes were contributing those peak hours with what appliances allows you to create very cost efficient load shifting patterns. And then ultimately, a few years down the road, there'll be no option but to upgrade the transformer, but we have optimized the cost for our customers in terms of grid spending almost optimally, like to the end point, and not have to prematurely upgrade. So those are just some examples of technology. Knowing what's happening in the home and then targeting the right decisions makes it much more cost efficient for both consumers and the grid cost.
It just kind of build a little bit on what Abe talked about, right? So at Ameren, we offer an electric vehicle charging program called Charge Smart as part of our beneficial electrification plan. But having that granular information at when and where customers are using EVs, or where it's being adopted, really will allow us over time to be able to refine those programs to offset usage on the grid by pushing customer behavior specifically around when and where they charge to that technology, meaning EVs and EVs only. So I think going back to Abe's point about understanding the data, disaggregating the data in the home will allow us to refine the programs we offer today and better manage the grid in the long run.
And from the customer side, are these programs that they have to opt into, or are some of them automatic offerings?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question because it depends on where you work, right? If some states allow an opt-in, some states as an opt-out, right? So it's a function of what is the regulatory environment or the legislative environment in your state. So we try to manage around that or work with that. We try to get customers at the point of when they buy vehicles using technology to be able to glean that data from disaggregating the load at the customer premises and then try to get to them from that perspective. So it's not a one-size-fit-all approach. It all depends on what is the environment we work in and operating. We have to be creative on how we capture that information.
So, Brian, thank you for bringing that point up. And Danny, that reminds me of another interesting anecdote here. We are talking as if it's so easy. Majority of the states today or utilities today are also relying on DMV for getting their electric vehicle registrations. Now, it's a good source, nothing wrong with that. But DMV does not tell you where they charge their car, what is the size of the charger. They generally give you a statistical information on, hey, in this zip codes, that many people have bought the cars. So on the much more advanced side, and congratulations, Lenny, for adopting the leading edge technologies. Well, self-serving by us. But it's all jokes aside, knowing exactly where your EVs are, who are charging. At Ameren, Illinois, we worked together to identify, hey, out of these 30,000 homes, these 2,000 homes actually bought the car and they're charging. Brian, you asked the question opt in, opt out. Like most people, when they buy their electric vehicles, do not think about, hey, let me go and tell my utility about it. They just start using it. Now, for the utility to identify who bought the car and who is charging at home allows them to go and offer the time of use rate, which ultimately a consumer is going to pay half approximately or whatever the rate difference is of cost in charging their car. So automatic identification through AI technologies of who has a car and who is charging allows us together to reach out to those customers and enroll them into the EVTOU rate, which is a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, I'll touch on that a little bit. I'll go back. I've been in this business a little bit over 30 years. And I wish technology as robust as what's available today was available back in the 90s. At one point, window air conditioners became readily available and cost effective, and adoption grew rather quickly in some parts of utility networks. And not having visibility into that growth quickly resulted in problems for utilities where, networks were overloaded. We had maintenance issues, et cetera, replacement issues. So it snowballed rather quickly. So affordability of the technology and adoption of the technology really changed the demand on the use of electricity in those networks and resulted in problems for the utilities. But in today's world, having the robust technology can allow us to really make informed decisions about, again, when and where customers are adopting to technologies, how they're thinking about it, where they're charging, when they're using power, when they're not using power, when they're running the dishwasher, right, et cetera. So understanding that what's happening behind the meter really allows us to say, okay, how do we create those programs or those policies that really allows us to effectively manage customer behavior, get customers to change their behavior, and ultimately manage the grid in a more cost-effective way by reducing the need for capital investment and ultimately providing that same level of safety, reliability, and resiliency that customers are looking for as we evolve over the next 2 decades into a two-way power flow in the grid, right? Less dependent on that being able to dispatchable power, but much more so the intermittency of power, but also stability of the grid, given their need to use power much more frequently and much more dependent on technology that uses that power.
Makes sense, Lenny. 100% makes sense. It's a beautiful future that we are working towards. We have a vision that things will be a lot more dynamic. The identification of how much load needs to flow in and out of a certain area of certain homes, the dynamic pricing associated with it, and ultimately it'll be a win for customers who will be actually making some money off their assets if they are available at the right times, plus minimizing the cost of grid management in time.
Yeah, listen, and you could talk all you want about, EVs and are they a thing of the future? We see more and more models becoming available, right? Affordability, customers being able to afford an EV will certainly come down just as like air conditioners did many, many years back. So adoption will grow. The rate and change might vary over time, but certainly as utilities, we need to be able to have those programs and those offerings such as time of use rates, right? Specific charging rates to EVs, right? Managed charging programs, et cetera, to really continue to shift that load on the grid to be able to manage the investments required to support the needs of our customers.
Really just seeing the power partnerships in action has been great. Are there any tips or lessons learned that you've had from working with each other, working kind of across the industry that might be helpful for other industry executives or other listeners who are looking for ways to utilize new tools to help them in their planning process? We can start with you, Epe.
Oh, sure. Thank you, Ben. I would say one of the learnings we have had over the last several years is, look, these new technologies take a lot of data, especially for machine learning AI. And also, we all have been doing things in a certain way for last several decades. So it takes a certain amount of getting over the inertia and certain amount of persistence. So getting all your data, getting it analysis done, having the planning, but then you want a lot of, let's say, distribution planners to adopt the new technologies. It just takes a lot more persistence because inertia is always there. It's hard to have people do things different from what they were doing for decades, right? So I would just say investment, patience, persistence, and understand that it will take getting over the hump of inertia to get to the other side of benefits is one tip I would like to leave the most of the utility executives with.
And it seems like investing in the technology, of course, but also investing in the employees so that they're ready to utilize these tools.
The mind share of their employees, the education, and the fact that world is going to be different, and we want to take all of our workforce on the other side of the new technology adoption.
So utilities have been operating for hundreds of years, right? And technology has been slow to change over time. And you can go back in history and look at that. But I think we have a point in time now where everything is changing at the same time. I said before, there's changing policies, there's changing customer expectation, and changing technology. So I think it's really about being really transparent with our regulators, legislators, some of our key stakeholders, and our customers, right? I think meeting with them and communicating with these groups, really one, to listen to what they have to say, understand their concerns, solicit feedback on their key issues, but really work to educate through workshops the importance of what's happening, what we're doing, and why we're doing it, right? I think that understanding is really critical. We then have to, I think, communicate the benefits of the grid investments, emphasize the key elements of the strategy around improving safety, reliability, and resiliency of our energy systems, and let them understand that, listen, we are leveraging every tool we have with a lens on the customer and how to help them manage affordability. And we are also trying to think about how we design the grid to be very cost effective, right? In that process, I think it's important that customers understand that we do this for their benefit. We're adding value to the grid. I think the last piece of it really is we also want to emphasize our support for equity and an orderly transition, I always like to say, right? I mean, it's an evolution, not a revolution, right? It's going to take some time for us to implement new technologies that will add value to customers. And this is something that will transform what the energy systems look like today over the next 2 decades. So I think it's all about educating, communicating, and making sure people understand why we're doing what we're doing and what value does it add.
And as we close out this episode, are there any final thoughts that you might want to share with the audience?
I'll go first, yes. Brian, some of my closing thoughts. First of all, it's a pleasure and it's a privilege to be working with so many utilities, large, and they are tackling this complex problem. I think I would like to say technology is there to help. Technology is actually moving very, very fast. We used to be working on AI technologies. Now we have generative AI technologies. Lenny talked about chatbots, etc., which now we call it Chat GPT in terms of the newest AI technologies. We are at the forefront of technology to help our partners. It's a complex world ahead, but use of technology, we can provide support in terms of how to navigate the future. Of course, we need a partnership, solid partnership on our partners on the utility side and other technology partners in the space. So looking forward to working with Lenny further and many of our other partners in the utilities in the next 10 years.
Brian, thank you again for the opportunity to be here today. I got to tell you, I've been in this business a little bit over 3 decades. And I sometimes look back at those first 2.5 decades or so. My career has been what I would say somewhat sleepy, right? A slow and steady evolution of technology, et cetera. But I think the next 2 decades is truly filled with excitement, as we transition to meet, as I said earlier, evolving technologies, changing policies and customer expectation. I'm truly optimistic that the next 2 decades will be innovative and beneficial both to customers and society as a whole. And we're going to have to leverage every technology, whether it's AI, smart switches, smart meters, smart thermostats, time of use rates, all of those mechanisms, I think, will come together to allow to best serve our customers, again, from a safety, reliability, or resiliency perspective in an affordable manner. So I think I'm optimistic again that this will evolve in a true fashion to allow us to get to those goals that we want to get to by 2050.
Well, thank you both so much for the time you spent here with us today and really just your industry leadership. There are a lot of moving pieces to all the work that's underway, and obviously safety and keeping bills as low as possible for customers are front and center. So really just thank you all for everything you're doing to help make that happen.
And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening, and come back next week to hear more from experts and industry leaders who are talking about the innovative ways electric companies are building a cleaner, smarter, stronger energy future for the customers and communities they serve. You can subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search Electric Perspectives. I'm your host, Brian Reel. Thanks for listening.